Thank you everyone who is still joining for our BJFS webinar with Spark, How Design Can Make You a Better Leader, led by Nat Pearce, who's our Head of Culture at Spark. We are recording the session today and we do want you to ask as many questions as you feel you want to through the Q&A functionality. So without further ado, I will hand over to Nat.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. It's so good to be with you here today on Friday. Hope you're having a good day and you've had a good week. So let's get straight into it. So this is me. I'm Nat. For those of you that don't know me, I'm passionate about lifetime learning, compassionate leadership and inclusive cultures. And as a designer, I help companies to design strategies and cultures and services that meet the needs of that company's customers. And I do all of this for Spark. So Spark is a design and innovation consultancy, and we specialize in digital transformation, designing and delivering amazing products and services. And if you're interested, you can find me on all sorts of channels under the handle Nat J Pearce. So Instagram, Twitter, Medium, and LinkedIn, but obviously LinkedIn is just my name. So that's me. So before we get into it, I have a couple of rules of engagement. I hope you don't mind, but here they are. So the first is it's time to be present. If you have any kind of distractions, or like maybe you've got your emails open or like too many tabs, or you're a bit peckish or you need a drink, sort that out now, and then let's be present here together for the next half an hour or 45 minutes. The second thing is it's quite lonely up here. This is really weird. I'm kind of just talking into the void of my living room. So if anything does resonate with you, give me a +1. I did say in the chat, but I think it's disabled today. So maybe raise a hand or just give me some kind of signal so I know that there's people still there. Thank you, I've got my first raised hand, that's amazing, yay! You can't see this, but when you raise your hands, it fills my screen, so this will be hilarious as we go through, I'm sure. And finally, as Karen said, if you do have a question or maybe even an idea or an observation, do pop it in the Q&A throughout. I've actually timed this, so I should allow time at the end for questions. I'm usually quite bad at that, but this time I'm hopeful for it. So let's get started. Is everyone ready? Yes. Yes, 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 you're ready. Okay, my screen is legit filling. Okay, great. So I want to start with my belief, and that's the reason why I'm talking to you all today. And that's that I believe that the way that we think about leadership and the skills that you need to be a great leader needs to change. I want to impress upon you that you don't need to be authoritarian, controlling, or aggressive to be a good leader. In my opinion, that makes a bad leader. I want you to believe what I believe, and that's that good leaders are empathetic, compassionate, and empowering. I've always wanted to use that animation on one of my slides, and now I've managed to, so that's great. I also believe that design can help us to be all of these things, and I'm going to share with you why and how today. But before I do that, I want to talk about why this is so important. Also, I'm really glad that I got the confetti slide in early on as well. That's another favourite of mine. Thanks, Tom Tyler. He actually created the confetti slide, so there you go. And the reason that this is important is because the reality is really shocking. And so now it's time for some provocative statistics. So in a poll conducted by Gallup, it was a poll about leadership proficiency. They found that 82% of managers and executives were considered to be lacking in leadership skills by their employees. 82%. That's basically 100%. That's shocking. That really shocked me actually when I found this stat. But in truth, it's not really that surprising because 87% of leaders say that they wish they'd had more training before they stepped into a leadership role. And that certainly speaks to my experience, but I think we should test this. So I'm going to do a quick poll. So hopefully you can see a poll now, and I'd like to know, did you feel that you had appropriate leadership training before you became a manager? Oh, we've got a couple of yeses, that's good, but okay. It's still going up in the no. So we've got about 90% on the no there, which is amazing because it basically corroborates this, this stat. 91% actually, fabulous. So I'm going to end that poll now. That was exciting. Got to use the poll early on. Did anyone enjoy that? Oh, now it's coming back. Thank you for the raised hands. How do I get rid of that? Okay. Now the impact of that training deficit is pretty damning. So 1 in 2 employees leave a job to get away from a crappy manager at some point in their career. I find this so sad. That includes people that, you know, really love their job and are really passionate about it, and then they have to leave because of a bad manager. Like, that's heartbreaking. Again, like, hands up, has anyone left a job due to a manager? Wow. Okay, so you can't see this, but my screen is filling up with raised hands right now. So yeah, the struggle is real. But I have an idea. I believe that we can learn an enormous amount about how to be great leaders and reverse this trend by understanding some core design principles and embedding them into how we work, which is really what I want to leave you with today. But before we can talk about that, we need to understand what led us here, what led us in this kind of authoritarian, controlling, demotivating space. And so let's cast our minds back to the Industrial Revolution. And we're going to stop there because if I go too far back, then it will become a history lesson and we ain't got time for that. So back then, leadership looked like this. It was a suited and booted gentleman domineering over the lowly workers, many of which were children, as you can see. And workers weren't really treated like people. They weren't people that had hopes and dreams. Their sole purpose was to make money for the owners, any which way how. And this often meant violence and aggression and only who knows what else. And I think really, for me, this is the origins of command and control. And what this led to was the traditional kind of leadership qualities that we've come to get used to today. So stuff like, you know, strictly, rigidly hierarchical structures, centralized decision-making, often made at the top, maybe even by one person, an unreasonable focus on results, often at the expense of the workers, and an excessive control that's driven really by a lack of trust. And I think overall what this brings us to is a style of leadership that's really characterized by fear rather than, you know, hope and empowerment. And it led to leaders like this. But the good news is that we don't have to be like them, and design has the answers for us. So in the design world, there are a lot of principles that we use and that really like underpin our approaches. And I believe that so many of them are super relevant to leadership. But today I'm just going to focus on 3 of them. And they are empathy, diversity, and prototyping. And I'm going to talk through why each of these are important for leadership and how you can bring them into your day-to-day. So let's start with empathy. So the ability to understand and share the feelings of another being. So empathy happens at the start of any design project. And at this stage, we're not trying to solve or fix a problem. We're just listening to understand what someone else is feeling. this is where I believe leadership should always begin. And in design, we aim to understand the needs of customers so that we can improve their experience. And I think leadership is no different. Like, as leaders, we should be improving the experience of our staff. And the third thing that comes to mind for me is that with empathy comes vulnerability. We have to create environments in design spaces where our research participants feel safe to be honest and open. And I think leaders need to do the same. And this is called psychological safety, which, fun fact for you, Google did a study into what makes some of their teams high performing and some of them not so high performing. And they found that psychological safety was the #1 contributor to their high performing team. So this is really no joke. And I truly believe that empathy is the key to unlocking psychological safety in our teams. So here's how you can bring empathy into your everyday practice. First, it's about building check-ins into all of your meetings. So this is basically leaving time at the start of your meetings, whether it's a one-to-one or a group meeting, to intentionally check in on everyone and basically warm people up to the meeting. You might ask, what are you bringing into the meeting today? And I might say, today I'm super excited because I did a talk and I nailed it, hopefully. Or I'm a little bit stressed because I'm buying a house at the moment and my estate agent won't get back to me. And that's a true story. Thanks for the raised hand. So allowing this moment of humanity will not only help your meeting go better, but it lets you know where your team is at and what support they might need. And if it's a team environment, you might check up on someone afterwards and kind of follow up on what they shared in that moment. And the second thing is change the questions that you ask your team with the intention of building more empathy and encouraging trust between you both. So I suggest, these are some questions that I suggest, and I learned them from a podcast recently. And they are, what's getting better, what's getting worse, and how does that make you feel? And I'll give you a fourth question. Well, it's not really a question, but a follow-up would be, tell me more. And these questions are designed to encourage honesty and openness between you and your team, but also they invite critique. And that's a really important element of leadership, because you certainly don't want to be the boss where your people tell you everything is fine, but the ship is actually sinking or sunk. We don't want that. So next, we have diversity, which is defined as the fact of many different types of things or people being included in something. So in design, this means ensuring that we're inclusive and representative of the people that we're designing for. It also means diversity of thought and bringing different skills and experiences into like the creative spaces. So we use this loads when we're coming up with ideas, especially. And I believe that this applies to leadership massively. The great leaders that I know reach out to their networks and bring diverse thinking into the way they develop their teams. It's kind of like you co-create a career path with other leaders for the people that you're working with. And, you know, like, I don't get why do we always think leadership needs to be this one-to-one relationship? Like, one person can't possibly fulfill or facilitate the aspirations of someone else. Like, that's mad. So I think like diversifying the people that are supporting someone is a massive, massive win for leaders. So here's what you can do. Become a matchmaker. So match people in your contacts from your network to people in your team around relevant skills or aspirations they have. One of the things that I have heard leaders that I aspire to say quite a lot is be open and generous with your network. It's such a gift, especially for people early in their career. And this is especially true when there's someone in your team that has aspirations outside of your skill set. So find them a mentor around that particular goal. And I guess just to give an example to this, so I'm a strategist and a service designer. I'm not a graphic designer or a product designer. I wish I had that talent, but I don't. So when I manage product designers, I'll happily link them up with some of the best design leaders that I know, because I know that will help them grow in their craft. Now, that doesn't make my role redundant, because I can support them in different ways, like their confidence or stakeholder management or coaching, consulting and leadership skills. So it means that they will benefit from these broader perspectives and hopefully have better career development as a result of that. Finally, prototyping. So if empathy was at the start of the design process, prototyping is often near the end. And it's basically what you do when you have an idea and you need to test whether it's any good. And the idea is that you do this in an easy, simple, low effort way. So you're not wasting time, effort, money, and all of that good stuff. And nowadays it's really the standard thing to do when creating products and services. So who's to say you can't use prototypes for career choices? Like, if you think about it, like, we all ruminate so much over career choices and career progression. Like, it's a massive source of stress. It's certainly been stressful for me in the past. I'm like, which path should I take? How do I know if I'm making the right decision? And I think as leaders, we have the ability to encourage people to experiment. And it's down to us to create a safe environment for them to do so. And you know what you'll get in return? I strongly believe in return for creating these environments and facilitating experimentation in our teams, we will get loyalty, trust, and more empowered people. So how about trying this? If you have someone in your team, they have a goal that they're really passionate about, but they're a little bit unsure, they don't know if it's the right choice for them, suggest that they prototype it. And the way to do this is to find the smallest, simplest action that they can test that goal with. And then once they're done that, you can reflect on it together. What did they learn? What do we need to iterate? And maybe they repeat it to really start to validate whether that goal is relevant for them. And I guess just to give a couple of examples of what that small action might look like, they might be shadowing someone for a day. They might sign up to a relevant newsletter, for example, or maybe they speak to someone in a different department. All really simple things, but they start to build up a view of what that future option might look like. And remember, the simplest and easiest form of prototyping is a conversation. So that's a quote from a book by Bill Burnett and Dave Evans. So they're from the Stanford Design School. And they wrote a book called Designing Your Life, which is all about how you can apply design principles to your life. And they talk loads about life-based prototyping. So they know a thing or two about this. So if you don't believe me, believe them. And I recommend that book, actually. It's really good. So that's Designing Your Life. So where does that lead us? It's good news. There's a spoiler. I forgot that I put that on that slide. By living and breathing these 3 principles, that's empathy, diversity, and prototyping, I believe that new leadership characteristics will start to emerge. So a style that's deeply empathetic and actively listens to the people that you're leading. One that allows for distributed decision-making, which is so vital in a world where decisions are needed to be made quicker than ever and often at a kind of global scale. One that puts the needs of people first, before profits, before, unreasonable client demands. That's something I believe really, really passionately about, because we know that happy staff equal happy customers. So there is method in taking that approach. A leadership style that is empowering and led with hope and passion and belief and purpose. Now, that's the type of leader that I want to work for. How does that sound to you? Yay! I've got quite a few hands raised. Yay. Luckily, no one can put their hand down, so I won't know if anyone disagrees with me. Hope they don't make that a feature. And then what do we see? We start to see leaders like this. Now, I'm sure I don't need to name them, but I will. So we've got Jacinda Ardern, the New Zealand president, whose response to COVID has been truly admirable. We have Michelle Obama, whose ability to capture a room with such power, but still radiate such compassion. And then you've got AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. So she's a senator for the New York 14th District. To me, she's such an inspiring voice for the people and a real beacon of hope in American politics. So these are the leaders that give me hope. These are the leaders that I want to see more of. And I truly hope that I can be like them one day. So as I said at the start, I believe that we can learn an enormous amount about how to be great leaders from design, specifically practicing true and authentic empathy with those that we lead, encouraging and facilitating diversity of thought in their development, and finally, creating an environment for career path prototyping. These are the principles that I feel will have the most powerful effect in terms of our leadership capability. So my question to you is this: which side do you want to be on? I certainly know mine. Thank you. Yay, I did it, I finished in the right amount of time.
No, it was really good. Thank you for that, Nat. So if anybody does have any questions, we've got a few that have come in, do submit them through the Q&A. So the first one, how do you empower someone who wants decisions to be made for them?
Say that again.
How do you empower someone who wants decisions to be made for them?
I think that, so my approach has always been a coaching approach. So it's very much about asking questions about why someone wants to do a certain thing, or, you know, what they think about the, you know, whatever their options are. And that can be really frustrating for people like you described that want decisions made for them all the time. But I strongly believe that if we continue to ask questions and we don't kind of take the easy route and say, oh, okay, just do this, then we will encourage that kind of behavior of thinking for ourselves, thinking more autonomously. And it might be a bit of a slog to begin with, but I would say, keep trying. Look up something called the GROW model. So that's a style of coaching where you have goals, you then think about the reality, you then look at the options, and then you talk about their will for taking that goal forward. There's loads of things online about the questions that you can ask within that. But yeah, I would really encourage you to stick with that coaching method, and I'm sure you'll see the benefits of it on the other side.
Then I'm currently in the process of trying to become a line manager. Are there any good source material to help me understand what makes a good LM? Yes,
so many. So I personally love to read. I read a lot. So a book that I read recently that's really good about building good cultures it's called Powerful, and her name's Patty someone, but it's basically about the Netflix culture and how they created a culture of freedom and individual responsibility. So that's a really good one. There's newsletters like HBR Leadership, which will give you all of their kind of studies on leadership qualities, and they're really like going down this route of like purpose-driven leadership, of, you know, empathy. Like they've got so much resources on that, so that's a really great one. Then there is also a podcast that I love called Squiggly Careers, and that's really, really great. I really recommend that, just generally for like workplace tips and tricks. And then finally, the other thing that I would mention is there's a new app called Stride. It's created by someone called Lauren Curry, and it aims to make leadership training more accessible. So they say that they're like democratizing leadership tech training, and that's recently out. I highly recommend checking that out. And you know, you don't need to be a leader to go on leadership training. Like, get in there early. I think it's great that you're thinking about this already.
Brilliant. And then the next one, do you have any tips of what skills to focus on if you're not yet a design leader but aspire to become one day?
Yeah, empathy, diversity, and process. I think, yes, so empathy first and foremost. Like, you can show empathy with your colleagues, with your family, with your friends. Like, you don't have to be a leader. Like, it's just about not putting your perspectives in front of them. It's about listening, active listening. So that's another one. That's the second one. Active listening is really important. I think we are very quick to jump to solutions and try to help people. And the key to empathy and active listening is holding off from doing that. So that's something that you can certainly practice. I think another skill that might sound like a bit of a weird one, but I think it's really key, is storytelling. So leaders have to tell stories to get people to buy into their vision. So being able to communicate really well and really, you know, in an inspiring way. And, you know, science tells us that stories are the best way to like connect with people. So practicing storytelling for me is such an important leadership skill, and maybe one that we don't focus on enough.
How do you lead remotely, which is really pertinent given the current circumstances?
Yeah, I don't think anything drastically changes. I think you just have to dial it up. So you have to, communication, you have to dial it up. And I know we're all getting like Zoom fatigue and stuff like that, but you know, the check-ins, the kind of faux water cooler chats, the coffees, the allowing people space to talk about what's really going on in their lives. And if they're, you know, allowing them to be vulnerable, like being vulnerable yourself, I think is so important. So I think like communication is really, really key, and making time and space for people to, you know, be themselves and kind of connect on a deeper level, I think is really important. I think as well, I mentioned kind of being vulnerable, but like as leaders, so this isn't just for remote settings, I guess it's like for crisis settings, like sometimes some leaders will go down the route of doing the kind of like, yeah, come on, we're going to be great. Like, it's going to, like, the kind of call to arms. But sometimes people need the space to just be like, oh God, this is a bit crap at the moment, and I'm not feeling great, and I'm probably going to feel not great for this week. And, you know, kind of be in that and feel what they need to feel. And so I think showing emotion and allowing emotions to be felt is really key in this context. But yeah, I mean, back to remote, communication.
Definitely. And how do you support a senior leadership team to realise they need training in leadership?
Oh, that's a good one. And you know what? It's one of my favourite things to kind of like shake senior leadership teams up. So like, I think you have to, like, telling people that they're not doing a good job will never work. Like, you know, taking that kind of like really assertive approach that it makes people get defensive. Like, naturally, like humans, we are super intelligent and stuff like that, but we're also like, we have that fight or flight. So it's important to not aggravate that reaction. So I would recommend sharing resources. So whether that's a podcast, whether that's you know, a HBR article. Like there's so many HBR articles, that's Harvard Business Review, that show that most managers, or not most managers, but a lot of managers are not trained to be good leaders. And it's not their fault. Like leadership is massively undertrained. So sharing kind of those types of articles from really renowned spaces kind of softens the implication that maybe they need it. And the hope would be that as a result of sharing that, they'll be like, oh, actually, maybe this is something that we should invest in. So I would use unbiased information to kind of subtly imply what you want to happen.
And I guess it probably leads into another question, which is quite similar but slightly different. How do you manage a bad manager?
That's a good one. That's such a good question. So first of all, don't blame yourself. I'm going to use the 3 principles from my talk for this to really like hammer that message home. So first of all, I'd say practice empathy. Like think about where they're coming from. Like maybe they've only had bad managers throughout their whole career, so they don't know any better. And they're just like replicating what they know. So try and put yourself in their shoes. Maybe they have a senior manager that's really like aggressive and puts a lot of pressure on, and they're just kind of like relaying that stress down. That's a really good place to start, rather than kind of being like, you know, us and them, because that kind of sets you off on a more negative tone. I think as well, like trying to understand respectfully if others feel the same as you, so that kind of like diversity of thought, because that way you know that it's not like a one-on-one thing, that others are feeling the pressure that you feel. And then I would say try having an open conversation about what you and the team need, but do it in the context of like, for us to be to perform at the best, or for us to be high performing, we need XYZ. So it's less like personal, it's more like what you need as a team. And you can prototype that conversation with each other. There you go, I managed to get it in.
There's now a slightly opposite one. So how do you know if you are empathizing too much with your managees? So I think that's from somebody that's obviously leading from the other way.
If you're empathizing too much with your employees, can you empathize too much with your employees would be my question. Like, I guess the assumption here is that empathy, like too much empathy, can maybe lead you to like a not good scenario. I think my response to that would be, empathy doesn't mean pleasing everyone. It just means being more informed about the impact of the decisions that you're going to make. So I think there has to be empathy with boundaries. I personally don't think that you can be too empathetic, but maybe I'm biased because I'm a designer, I don't know. I don't think you can, but if empathy equals people pleasing, then that is an issue. So the behavior that I would focus on is setting the expectation that I want to understand how you're feeling, and I will bear that in mind in my decisions, but I can't make decisions based on individual needs. I have to make it for the collective. So I think like, yeah, reframing the outcome of empathy would be really important in that context.
Cool. But do you think that these principles are still relevant in leadership roles when you aren't directly managing anyone?
Yes, because even if you're not directly managing someone, you face off to people. So maybe that's like your executive team, or maybe you face off to like another team or another department in your organization, or you have external clients. Like practicing empathy is relevant in all of those situations. Where there's people, you need empathy. I think diversity of thought is good in all kinds of projects, because otherwise you're biased. Like, and it might not be, it might be seeking some insight from external subject matter experts, or it might be bringing in teams that you don't usually speak to. But I think that is really key to projects. And I think me as a leader, when I'm looking at project teams, I'm like, how do we make sure we have the most diverse group? Because if we've got someone designing a project and it's just like 5 white men, there's going to be things that are missed out, certainly, whether that's for women, whether that's for other ethnicities, like whatever that might be. And then prototyping, everyone should prototype. It de-risks any decision that you make. So it's kind of, I feel like that's a no-brainer. Easier said than done though, I appreciate that.
I guess we've got time for a couple more. So how do you demonstrate leadership before you get into a more senior role, especially in interviews?
Okay, so there's kind of 2 questions there. So I'll focus on the first one, like how do you demonstrate leadership before you're in a leadership role? So I think that you can definitely display leadership qualities without having a leadership role. So you might look for opportunities to support other people in your team. Like if you hear like one of your teammates is struggling with something, you can kind of offer your support and, you know, practice the kind of skills that we spoke about today. I think as well, looking for mentoring opportunities either in your job or outside of your job is a really good way to practice leadership skills. And, you know, we have a massive issue with diversity and inclusion across industries. So why not put your hand up to support someone from a marginalized background and mentor them with the skills that you have? And then you can kind of, it goes both ways because they can give you feedback on how you're mentoring them and you can give them feedback. So that's quite a nice way to practice. And I think generally, like on your projects, being mindful of like how you show up and the skills that you portray with that kind of leadership lens on is really key, because you can show those behaviors and then people are like, oh, look how great they are at leading, and it's more likely to get you a role. I think in interviews, so when I do interviews around leadership, I often ask people like, what does your leadership style look like? And that's a really great opportunity to talk about what leadership means to you and what you would bring and what you're passionate about. So for me, I talk about like empathy, belonging, like inclusion, like all of this kind of stuff. And I think if you're in an interview space, like an interview goes 2 ways. Like it should be a conversation. Like you don't have to wait to be asked a question. Feel free to offer things up that you feel are relevant. So if I was in your shoes, I would talk about the behaviors and the skills that you have that are relevant to leadership, even if you haven't done them in a leadership context.
Fab. And then there's just one which you've probably answered a lot of it on, but just in case you've got any other thoughts, what advice would you give to somebody who's just stepping into a leadership role?
Get a mentor. Get an unbiased mentor that can, you know, give you advice and give you pointers. I would also say alternatively, or at the same time, like joining leadership communities where you can speak to other leaders or new leaders especially, that are trying to learn in the same space as you. And yeah, listen, read, watch, like just continuously learn, like see your role as a leader to learn and try things out. And, you know, if you're open about that with your team, they will give you the benefit of the doubt when you try things. Like if you're saying, look, I've just stepped into this role, I'm new to it, I'm learning, give me feedback, be open, help me grow as a leader that's going to work for you. I think that creates a really good, a good kind of place for you and your team, especially in the early days.
And I think the last one is, what is the role of head of culture? I only have a head of HR in my business, but feel like something is missing.
Okay, that's a good question. What do I do? So a head of culture is responsible for the end-to-end employee experience and essentially making it as positive and empowering and supportive to those in our team. So I think about things like, what are our cultural values and how do we live by them? How do I make sure that people can bring their best self to work? How are people's mental health and well-being supported? How do we support people in their career progression? And then there's also the kind of like process side of it, of like, how do we do recruitment? How do we do onboarding? What's our D&I strategy? So it encompasses everything in that end-to-end employee experience space. And what I do is I work with the rest of the leadership team and the broader leadership, the board, to kind of think about, okay, what are our people priorities right now? How do we turn this into a strategy? And what are the actions that we're going to take to make this an even better place to work? And importantly, this should always be defined by the feedback that we get from our team. Like, we shouldn't just be like, oh yeah, I think we should do different types of reviews. We should do different types of reviews if our teams are telling us that our reviews are crap. So that's a kind of overview. I hope that answers the question, but if not, get in touch with me and I'm more than happy to share more.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Nat. I think we've just got to the end there. We will be sharing the recording, and I'm sure you'll pull together a blog just with a curation of all the questions. And like I say, if anyone does want to follow up with Nat, I will be reaching out to everybody, so please do just respond and I will do an intro. And thank you so much. I really found that interesting, Nat. And we've got a number of events still running. There's two this afternoon, so do check us out on the website, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the festival, and I will see you all soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.